Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to my humble abode. Today we're going to discuss DAWs. Choosing an environment to work in is generally an arduous task, as there's always that little voice in your head making you question whether you made the right decision in the first place. Or maybe you should have been a plumber all this time instead. But God gives his toughest battles to his stronger soldiers, as I'm sure you've heard, so I'm going to waste my time on looking for the perfect DAW just so you don't have to waste yours. It's not like I have anything better to do anyways. Let's then take a look at what we have available within the reaches of my download folders. We're going to talk about pros, cons, and talk about some things that are not usually mentioned. If you have no patience to sit through the entire video, here's the gist. It does not matter what DAW you choose, because it's all about what you will add to it later, rather than what it comes with in the box, so choose whatever. If that answers your concerns, have a nice day, see you in the next video. If not, there's a bit more of me talking you're gonna have to sit through. We're going to talk about what DAWs are, what we need them to do, the similarities between them, which are more important than the differences, and finally, I'm going to give a few recommendations. And if you don't like what I have to say, the only thing I will ask of you is to share this video with other people who might need this. I'm a small channel, seeing the number of subscribers go up makes me know that people are enjoying this content. Thank you! Okay, I cannot start this video without explaining what a DAW is, so bear with me. A DAW, Digital Audio Workstation, is the software environment where you make music. Think of it as of a video editor, like Premiere Pro or Final Cut or Sony Vegas. People are usually familiar with those. Same thing, but for song creation. Do you absolutely need a DAW to make music? Well, no. But you will be sacrificing the comforts of having one, and that will make the process more tedious than anything. Stick to a DAW, it's well worth the investment, and more on that later. You don't have to take out a mortgage, don't worry about it. And if you want to go and work without one, you can do it later, but I personally prefer still having my hair at 30. Okay, so what exactly does a DAW do? Why is it such a big deal? Well, you can take a piece of audio, cut it, rearrange the pieces to fix an issue, or make something completely new and generally, manipulate that piece of audio however you want to achieve the result you personally are looking for. That's the general gist of why we care. It can get a lot more deeper than that, touching upon audio recovery, data bending, and even seismology and biometrical engineering. I found that one through Tentacruel. But what do we as musicians care about when it comes to the basic functionality of a DAW? Well, I was able to reduce our concerns to 4 separate categories. The first one is organization, or keeping everything we need a couple of mouse clicks away so we can always grab whatever we need right away. This includes libraries, samples, virtual instruments, plugins, effects, as well as previously started or finished projects. Having everything in one place is fantastic. The second concern is composition. This is a really wide umbrella that's housing everything that has to do with working on a timeline, structuring, writing, recording, and arranging different parts and instruments. The third concern is mixing, aka making sure that every song part fits well with other ones, nicely and cohesively. Usually it's a matter of cutting away what's not needed and preserving or enhancing what is needed by adding effects and generally making stylistic choices. And the final concern is mastering. It's the final polish of a project, making sure everything is okay and in order, and the final render as we push that project out the door. Okay, I know, that's a lot if we are to dissect it like that. The good news in that regard is that all DAWs currently available on the market will satisfy all of these requirements. So, fantastic, this means we don't necessarily have to sacrifice one thing over another when making the choice. But that's not all. The main difference between all different iterations of what's essentially the same type of software is how they fulfill the requirements we listed, the overall workflow. It's an abstract term, and to make a guided decision we need to explain that. But rather than focus on differences between different DAWs, which would take hours, I want to focus on similarities between them. This way you will see that even if different software has different ideas about how things should be run, they do share similar core ideas, which in turn makes them more similar than we initially thought, and everything else is just extra seasoning on top. So before I can give a recommendation of any DAW, I would like to show you ways in which all of them are similar. The basic toolset they all provide us with, that we can consider to be the core of any music production software. As my examples, I will take 2 of the most popular DAWs out there, FL Studio and Ableton Live, although the functionality is shared across every DAW. I'm just saving myself the time in editing. The very first thing we will find, although maybe not the one that sticks out right away, is the presence of folders. We're covering the organization here. This is the section that allows you to manage your samples, instruments, and effects in what's usually a tree-like organization style. So you have folders inside folders inside folders. So everything is pretty neat and visible at a glance. Some DAWs prefer having a dedicated section for this visible at all times, like both FL and Ableton, while some other DAWs might require you to press a button to make an instance of that menu pop up. I think Reaper does it, for example. The second thing we can find is the elephant, which makes up 90% of the proverbial room. It's the timeline and tracks section. This is where you place individual instruments, parts, and patterns. While Ableton opted for a more classic version of that, with tracks being vertically aligned near the timeline, FL separates the two into their own sections. This comes with added functionality, in the case of FL Studio, at the expense of being clear and intelligible. Now, it's not a big deal, but if you are used to working in a classic type of timeline arrangement, like in the case of Ableton, Reaper, or Logic, the pattern-based approach of FL Studio requires a slight bend to the way you think about timelines. You can still make FL work like any other classic DAW, it's just that right out of the box it's going to feel slightly awkward, until A, you figure out how to use it in a classic way, or B, its unorthodox approach clicks in your head. Neither is better than the other, it's simply different perspectives applied to the same idea. That being said, most other DAWs like Ableton, aforementioned Reaper, Logic, Pro Tools, or whatever else follow the classic approach of one track equals one instrument, and that lane is then reserved only for that instrument. The point still stands, all DAWs share a way to see the instruments and the timeline. The third thing we will find shared across DAWs is a mixer. The idea of a mixer is very simple. Remember the tracks from the previous points? Well, each of them can be linked to a channel on a mixer, and when you manipulate that channel, whatever you're doing to it applies to that entire individual track that's linked to it. That's a great way to apply effects to specific instruments without affecting others, or to level out the volume without spending too much time in the plugin settings. A mixer is the cornerstone of every workstation and an essential puzzle piece to get to the final stage of the production of your song. And this is where things get interesting. This time, FL Studio has opted for the more classic approach. You can link whatever track to whatever channel, you can link different channels together if you want, and so on. That's the way mixers usually work. Ableton decided that it wants to be a unicorn here, and its mixer is non-existent. If anybody tells you that this is Ableton's mixer, they're a paid actor and should be trusted. I haven't ever seen a human being use these. What Ableton has is an effects section linked to each track, so when you click on a track, underneath you will find and can manipulate all the effects on that track. Much like when you click on a mixer channel in FL Studio, on the right you will find all the effects on it. Fundamentally, all of this is the same thing with a different coat of paint on top of it. Now, do I prefer classic mixers? Yes, I do. As an Ableton producer, am I bothered by them doing things a little differently? No, not really, because my workflow isn't affected in any substantial way. These three sections, for the lack of a better word, are everything that we need in order to make a song from start to finish, and they are shared in one way or another across every single DAW under the sun. So which one is better then? Well, it does not matter. All of them are viable options, and neither will actively hinder you in your music making process. You will have your preferences shaped over time, which will make you decide for one over another, but what you need to understand is that at the end of the day, the selection of a DAW is not as critical as you might think. Whichever DAW you may choose, ultimately what matters is the selection of third-party plugins you will glue to it. Oh my god, okay, you want a suggestion? Fine, I will give it to you. Now, there are about a dozen different DAWs I can name off the top of my head, give or take a couple if you wake me up at night, and I specifically have not mentioned Mac versus PC debate, because most of these are available on both. The only real exceptions are GarageBand and its bigger brother Logic, which are Apple only. Is that a big loss? Not really. For the purposes of this video, I'm going to reduce the entire DAW market ecosystem to two categories of people: beginners and advanced users. I'm saying right away, if you are a beginner and cannot get your hands on the beginner DAWs, it's absolutely fine. The best software is the one you can get your hands on right now. Also, classifying beginner DAWs as beginner DAWs is not discrediting their capabilities. These can carry you through your entire career. I'll label them as beginner DAWs because they're intuitive enough for a beginner to pick up. Even more so, most of the tutorials online, of which there are more than stars in the sky, are made with these two DAWs, so those tutorials will be extremely easy to follow if you're a beginner. These two DAWs are FL Studio and Ableton Live. Yes, me using them as examples previously was a cheeky way to teach you a tiny bit about them. I'm not sponsored by any of them, even though I wish I would be, considering I have been using Ableton for the last decade. Okay, not entirely true, I have been using Logic at our studio, but I remain faithful to Ableton in my heart. But what about the other side of the spectrum, the 0.1% that feel limited by everything? If you're one of those people, then you absolutely heard about Reaper, and there's nothing new I can tell you about it. It's the Linux of DAWs, and I'm pretty sure it can fly space shuttle using MIDI controls if you let it. For us mere mortals, it's overkill. I have used Reaper for an entire album cycle, and I loved it, after some tinkering with its visuals. At the end of the day, I still return to Ableton for most of my work, but I usually do mix and master in Reaper because of how incredibly fast it runs. But the decision-making part doesn't stop here. Visiting the websites of the aforementioned FL Studio and Ableton Live reveals several tiers of purchases available. There are demos, but you're going to be limited with what you can do. FL Studio, for example, doesn't allow you to save your projects. That one always baffled me. Anyway, FL Studio's website shows 4 different versions available. The more you pay, the more plugins you get. Now, I've gone through all of them, and I'm as confused as I ever was about the decision. FL Studio has hands down the worst plugin selection out there. For every good plugin, there are 6 more that are, in my opinion, just bloat and not worth it in the slightest. I am really struggling to recommend anything past the fruity version, in all honesty. But as usual, try things out for yourself and base your decision on that rather than what a weirdo tells you on the internet. Besides, even if you buy the cheapest option now, it can be upgraded by paying the difference later, so you don't have to spend all that money up front, but only when you are completely sure you need it. That being said, I have quite the opposite opinions as far as Ableton is concerned. Again, as an Ableton power user, full disclaimer, I am completely and unabashedly biased. But that's probably the only DAW where I have no issues with recommending the most expensive tier right away. Not for the virtual instruments, because honestly, who cares? But for the audio effects contained within it. I rarely even reach for third-party plugins nowadays, plugins I have paid for, because most of what I need can just be done with what comes with the Suite tier at no expense of quality. But again, you can get the cheapest tier and upgrade it later. But this wouldn't be complete if I don't mention Reaper once again, because people cannot shut up about how cheap it is. It's $60 and then you are done. But if you're a beginner, the difficulty of Reaper is, in my opinion, not worth going through, because it'll likely put you off by how convoluted it is. Been there, done that, got the t-shirt. It's a fantastic DAW, but I don't think as a beginner it's the right pool to jump in right away. And this is about it when it comes to DAWs. Don't overthink it, it's just a tool. It's all about what you add to it later, so it's not going to be too detrimental to go with the cheapest option out there, or switching later on. The package deals make sense if you're interested in the plugins that are thrown in the mix, and in my opinion, Ableton's plugins are the only ones quote-unquote worth it. But then again, don't take my word for it, make your own informed decision, watch some other videos, read reviews, or whatever you want to do. Try them out. I just hope that I provided you with enough context to make that decision a little easier. My name is Viktor Vee, and I will see you in the next video. More music production stuff is on my website viktorvee.com. Also, like, subscribe, yada yada. Bye!